Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Andy Neill. You may detect from Andy and my accents that we're both British.
Yeah.
Andy is in Canada. We're going to talk about the value of enterprise architecture. As always, I always ask my guests, Andy, where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. So you can look up Andy Neill on LinkedIn. I'm one of the highest LinkedIn profiles there.
And you have and it's Neill with a double L, isn't it?
It's Neill with a double L. It's spelled the posh way. It comes from Scotland originally with the McNeils.
Right. And just LinkedIn or?
Also, my email address, it's aneill@infotech.com is my email address if you want to find me there as well.
And you have a really interesting career background.
Yes.
In so much as that you are as well as working at Infotech, you have set up a high-end chocolate shop. You are a qualified butcher and fishmonger.
Yes.
And the job that I've always wanted, which is a mystery shopper for Guinness.
Yes. That was a good job.
How did you get to do those?
So the butcher and fishmonger, I was very lucky actually when I was studying through college and university to support myself and to get a bit of money on the side to pay for my books and whatnot. I would work at the local grocery store as Sainsbury's. And at the time, back in the day, they used to have proper fishmongers and butchers at the Sainsbury's. Nowadays, they just open up packages and so on. But back in those days, they had qualified fishmongers and butchers. So I asked them, can you train me? Can you teach me as a qualified butcher and fishmonger? So they did. So I went through the Guild of Fishmongers and the butchery courses, and actually I know how to cut up a cow, cut up a pig, and do everything properly. Although I'll probably never use the skill again, but it was interesting to have. Yes.
So what did you do to be a mystery shopper of Guinness? I know that's like an obvious question, but
yeah. So that was actually I had a friend of mine who was in an agency, and that agency specialised in doing small promotions for different companies. And one of the promotions that came along, she said, "Oh, I've got this promotion for Guinness. Do you want to do that? Because I don't really drink beer." I was like, "Of course I want to do that." So they kind of paid me it wasn't very much, they paid me a small amount, but what you would do was go to different pubs in your local town and ask the bartender for a Guinness, and you would make sure it was poured correctly. So it was poured on a 45-degree angle, it was left halfway and left to settle, then topped up, and you had to make sure the head is exactly the right size and there's no bubbles and all that kind of stuff. And if they did it all correctly, you give them a kind of $10 gift token that they give you. So you got a couple of free pints of Guinnesses every weekend, and you got, I don't know, £30 or whatever for pay. I was like, perfect job. It was great.
It's an ideal job, isn't it?
Yeah.
What else do you need? And then you had to, unfortunately, you then had to become a software and engineer and a data architect.
That's right. I did. Yes.
So talk us through that. So why did you go after having the perfect job of drinking beer and getting £30?
Right. So I was always training to be a software engineer by trade.
You did that at university, did you?
I did at university, yeah. That's what I was doing at university. So I was always interested in computers. And when I was doing software engineering, I trained as a J2EE programmer, if you can remember back that far. So that's kind of where I started my career. I realized quickly that data was my thing. I liked to play with data and make sure the data structures were right for the code and that kind of thing. So I kind of launched my career into the data side. Then I became a database administrator, and then things snowballed from there, and I started to realize that actually if you know enough about the data world, you can become a data architect and start organizing information and solutions in the enterprise architecture and the data architecture side.
So we're talking about enterprise architecture. So for someone like me who knows nothing about architecture, what does that mean?
So enterprise architecture is the practice of it's an oversight function and an organization that helps organizations make decisions in technology early to avoid downstream consequences. So it'll be make decisions like what's the infrastructure that we're going to use to support this application? How are we going to build in decoupling of services so that we can expand later on if we want to? How do we make sure the code is scalable? So all of those are factors that you have to consider as an architect, and you're almost a consultant to work with system integrators and programmers and developers to ensure that the products that you create are really rigorous and scalable and really usable going forward.
So it's a bit like architecture, but in if we think about a building,
yeah.
And while you're gonna, you architect something in a particular way,
exactly,
because you don't have the money for the garage, but but you make sure that you've got the provision for it.
Exactly.
And you might even have the hard standing for whatever it is, but you're in effect building that structure and that framework.
That's right, and that's where the analogy kind of comes from, and that's why we're called architects. And a good example is when they built the bridge across Don Valley in Toronto, where I'm located right now. The architect responsible for that, he thought about it and said, at some point in the future, we're going to have a subway line, and when we have a subway line, it's going to need to cross this road. So I'm going to make this bridge particularly large so the underneath can house a subway line in future if we need it. And he built that back 50 years before the subway line existed. Right. And lo and behold, it was used. 50 years later, it was required. So saved a massive amount of money by making those decisions early.
So why as an organization do we need to have and take into account of enterprise architecture?
So when you take into account enterprise architecture, it provides massive value long stream. So as I said, the amount of technical debt, that is the amount of decisions that are being made early to influence what's happening later in the life cycle of a product, isn't necessarily made unless you have somebody very experienced in the area. So enterprise architects come with them a plethora of experience they can bring into the project and say, look, hang on, I've been burned here before. If we were to make this decision instead, then we're going to enable us to get into this new territory or collaborate with this new platform or whatever it might be going forward. So those kind of things we need to call out early. And the way we do that as architects is we develop reusable patterns and standards. So we like to create reusable solutions, if you like, that we can take off the shelf and use going forward. And those reusable patterns, two things are important. You need to measure how much effort it took to create that pattern so that when we reuse it later, we can say, we've saved so many pounds or dollars because we reuse that pattern. Therefore, we don't need to spend the effort in doing it. And that pattern has been designed by a very experienced architect who knows what they're doing. So is aligned to best practice standards and enables you to integrate with other platforms going forward and things as well.
Because it seems to me we're in this world where the answer is cloud. What's the question?
Absolutely.
And therefore, because if you think about the history, the history of computers was that they were running really old days. They were run with people with white coats and clipboards, and you didn't have a screen and people ran programs for you.
Yeah.
And then what happened was that there was all these applications basically started, and none of them talked to each other.
Right.
And then we moved to this area where we actually got all these applications and we got them to talk to each other.
Right.
And now we're moving back to cloud, which is where we're basically getting people to run our programs for us. And we're going to have lots of little applications running for us, and none of them talk to each other.
Absolutely. And that's where you need architecture to intervene, because it's important for the integration of the applications that we're deploying in the cloud to effectively talk to each other. And in fact, as enterprise architecture grows, there's different disciplines in enterprise architecture. There's the data and the application and the infrastructure. And people think, oh, infrastructure architecture is going away because we're going to cloud now. And that's not true, actually. As you deploy to the cloud, you need to think about your infrastructure just as much, if not more, than you did before. Because nowadays, as you build solutions, you're building things like Dockerized components that you can scale horizontally and scale vertically, and using orchestration mechanisms so you can actually upload services and take them down when you don't have throughput. So there's all kinds of new decisions that has to be made because you're going to that cloud environment. And in order to ensure that you keep solutions that are interoperable and talk to each other and share information and data, that's the most important aspect of an enterprise architecture's life, is data, which is the most valuable commodity in the world. We want to make sure it's shared between those applications effectively. COVID is a great example, right? As we come into COVID, it's accelerated how much data has been created because of now we're working from home and creating more data. But it's actually become really important of standardized ways of sharing information and data. We want to share who's been tested for COVID and who's positive and contact tracing and all those kind of things. So now it's in the cloud. We want to be able to communicate and make sure that information is shared where necessary for the benefit of humankind.
Yeah, I remember going to an event in London where people were with a whole bunch of CMOs, and the question that was asked was, "What's the thing that keeps you awake at night?"
Right.
And the person who asked the question was expecting, like brand or leads or whatever. And actually, one of the CMOs actually said, "The thing that keeps me awake at night is how on earth are we going to get the data from all our different applications to talk to each other?"
Right.
And he was spending, he was a small, medium enterprise, and he was spending the equivalent of, let's talk in American US dollars. He was spending about $12,000-15,000 a quarter, which, if you added that up over a year, that was an equivalent of a head that he could have.
Right.
Basically, making sure these things talk to each other and the data was in sync.
Absolutely.
And I think that must be a classic example, I would have thought.
Absolutely, yeah. Data, data interoperability, and is a very, it's a topic that's kind of misunderstood, and there's specialist architects that just deal with data integration. That's their entire job, is to make sure that the data is, you can push the data around correctly and make sure the data is of the right quality and make sure data is being used the way it needs to be used. So it's a very common problem, and architects can help with that journey. I had a similar problem in a company I worked for, a very large enterprise company I used to work for. And keeping the data in sync for custom records is a very good example. And we call it master data management, a golden source of truth. The CIO came to me from his company one day and said, "Andy, I need to have one single source of truth for my customers." I said, "You realize we've got 32 different systems which all think they're the source of truth for customers, don't you?" He said, yeah, I know that. We want to make them all talk to each other so that we can have single source of truth. It's not an easy task, and architects are good at bringing that information together and making that happen. It can cost millions to make that integration happen, but how much money does that save downstream? A significant amount more, right?
Well, the worst thing you can have is someone who spells your name wrong, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, there is that.
But I've worked for organizations where where architecture is seen as like an ivory tower. They were always known as the no person. So you go, someone wanted to do something, and you go to them in IT, or you needed to get it checked by architecture. So you go there, and they say no.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the original reputation, and architecture is changing a little bit in that aspect. As we start to think about more agile methodologies and iterative methodologies, what we're doing now is changing from the ivory tower approach to more of a, let's distribute the architecture function out to the teams that are actually delivering on this. So I like to see specialist architects actually shoulders to shoulders in the Scrum teams, actually delivering and integrating together. So rather than saying, "Here's my architecture, thou shalt comply," it's much better to coach people and say, the reason I'm making these architecture decisions early and teach you how to do that as well is because it's going to save you money and time in the long run, because you can take patterns off the shelf and reuse them, or you can comply with new technology that's about to come around the corner, or whatever it might be. So those are those opportunities for architects to change their behavior and get out from the ivory tower and actually be part of the solution of delivering these products together, to make sure that architecture is as understood discipline and it's more distributed and it becomes more of a natural thing to do.
Right. So in what we're seeing is architecture is kind of coming out of the darkness and starting to be far more collaborative. Is there anything that in the current COVID, there's been I've seen a number of data architects been laid off. Is that, if I'm a data architect, what could I be doing in an organization to support the organization and be visible?
Absolutely. I think architecture right now needs to show value quickly. So you need to show value both and communicate that both upwards and downwards. So not just saying, okay, these are the architecture models and patterns that I've been creating. Attribute those with effort and with value. So you can say, I have reduced the technical debt by X, and that saved a return on investment of Y. So if you can actually attribute this to say how much money you're saving and how much value you're having as an architect, and even things like enriching the experience of users and actually hiring the profile of IT in the business's eyes. If architect can do that by supporting in some way, that's another massive win. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of surveys and questionnaires around how satisfied are you with IT? If you can make that number go up by providing architecture oversight, that's a massive win, because that's what we really want to see in organizations going forward. So make yourself known, attribute value, and make sure that people know what you do and how much you're contributing as a return on investment.
And teaching people, I guess.
Absolutely, it's all about teaching. And nowadays, I much prefer architects to teach and coach rather than do. I've seen lots of architects, because they have lots of experience, they get their hands dirty and start developing code and all that kind of thing. And yes, they can do that in theory, but I don't want to see them doing that. What I want them to see is coaching people and saying, this is how you think like an architect. I've interviewed many architects over the years. And when I interview for an architecture position, I don't ask technical questions. I'm asking questions to identify how somebody thinks about a problem with critical thinking. That's what I care about. I care about how someone works through a solution in their mind to get to a logical endpoint, and whether they're collaborative and whether they're going to be the right kind of culture fit. I can actually teach architecture stuff technically quite quickly. It's really difficult to teach somebody to think like an architect, think of those, make decisions early and build those in and instill that culture as the development continues.
So with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we're recording this in November of 2020, and we're obviously seeing a number of people are working from home, so there's going to be changing of operating models. And even though there's been an announcement in the last week of 3 vaccines, we don't know, but it's highly unlikely we're going to go back to the way that it was before. So what things, capabilities, and what could we be doing as architects in terms of thinking of the future and proactively working on that?
Absolutely. I think the way we need to do this is, we're going to be working from home anyway. So the important thing here is build relationships with the business. So architects often don't get access directly to business lines. That's a mistake. I think architecture as a practice should be aligned to the strategy organization of the organization, and really architects should have direct one-on-one contact with the business day to day. If they can actually piggyback on what the business needs by articulating business capabilities and the value through business capabilities, that's where architects can provide the most value, and those are relationships you need to build. So even via Teams and conference calls and that kind of thing, you can still have those relationships, and you can talk to the business and non-technical people and say, look, what's keeping you up at night? What can I help you with? What can I fix for you? How can I make sure that you get home at 5 o'clock so you can see your kids, rather than having to hang around 4 hours inputting this rubbish quality data? Those are the things that architects can really be helpful for.
Right. And in terms of trying to work out scenario plans for the new normal or whatever that is, because
Absolutely.
We don't know what it's going to be like, but we know that it's not going to be the same. But I'm doing this proactively.
Absolutely. And I think I've spoken to a lot of organizations recently that are going through, obviously, the what's the new normal and what happens after COVID, and how can I provide my value as an architect right now? And my response is always, look at the business capabilities and look at remember before COVID, we were thinking about, what's the new exciting areas of business capability that we could get into? What's the innovative stuff to differentiate us from our competitors? We seem to have forgotten that we were doing that before, and we've now got into firefighter mode, right? So go back to those innovative solutions, because when COVID finishes, you need to launch into, look at this cool new service, look at this new way I can do this product or this new service. If you can have those ready exactly as we're coming out of COVID and provide that service, you're going to be head and shoulders above your competitors, and it's going to springboard you into the future.
Yeah, and that's going to be great for your own visibility internally, isn't it? Because as I'm a CEO, and what I want, I'm seeing people contribute. I want to see people providing innovation, and I want people to actually be, here's an idea. Now,
absolutely,
I may not accept every idea, but the fact is that people are coming up with ideas.
Exactly, and it kind of builds your brand, and it bridges the gap between the innovation department and the enterprise architecture department. For every 30 ideas that get put forward, a couple of those might stick, and that's when architecture should jump on top of them and say, look, I can support you in taking this forward and making this a reality. So that's where kind of the bridge we like to see, and that's where you can provide real support as an architect, and as I say, build the architect's brand and build architecture's discipline brand as a whole, just to show the value of that practice.
Andy, that's been fantastic. 20 minutes go so quickly.
It does.
I've lost you.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, sorry. The 20 minutes go so quickly. Thank you so much for your time today. Remind everybody where they can get hold of you.
Yep, if you go to LinkedIn and just type Andy Neill, spelled with Neill, you can find me on LinkedIn and message me on there. You can also email me at aneill@infotech.com.
Fantastic, Andy. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks,
and talking about your Guinness mystery shopper stuff. I'm still can't get over it, really.
Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks so much for today. Bye.